Chapter 2.9, Part 1, Film, Video, and Digital Art. And we are in the Part 2 of the book, Media and Processes. Film and video were distinguished originally because film was celluloid and video was videotape. And digital art was something later and digitized. Pretty much all of it is now digital, if that makes sense. The same medium is applied to all three for the most part, but some people still use the older techniques. So before we get into moving pictures, we're going to backtrack a little bit into images that look like they were moving with the zoetrope, this antique toy, and it gives the illusion of movement. And if we go back to chapter 1.5, it talks about motion and the persistence of the vision, the optical illusion that something's moving, because our eyes sort of connect two things together. There's a sort of a hesitation or a remainder of an image in your eye or your brain, really, for a couple of seconds or nanoseconds. So you are connecting all these still images together. So film is really a bunch of still images moving, in a projector. That's originally what was done. But before that, a zoetrope would be a spinning sort of a toy. That's originally what it was, with an image that's slightly altered each time. So there's completely standing still, transitional walking, a bigger step, back to that, medium step, and so on. So when you spin this and you're looking through the slots, you look in here, then you see it as moving because it is slightly changed. And this is true of animation as well. So I'm going to back up here again. So to make moving pictures motion, first had to be frozen in the still images. Okay, so this is kind of a playful artwork that's more current, 2016 ceramic. And these were spinning plates, and it's sort of the same idea as the zoetrope. And there was something even before this that was very similar, which would spin and you would observe it. And I think we have an image of it. But it shows that moving, like when it's spinning around, it gives us that sense of movement. So he's playing around with this idea, this Italian artist, play plates. He is using stroboscopic motion in the sense of the same thing as the zoetrope. The phenakistoscope, I always feel like I'm going to forget a syllable in there, or magic disc. It's a wood and glass contraption. Now, this is quite old because it's 1840, the very beginning of photography, which doesn't have to do with this, but it's interesting that these two inventions sort of correlate and come together later to make film. But when you're looking at the mirror here, you're seeing, that image spinning around here, and it has that illusion of movement at the top. But look at how connected these are to those plates. Muybridge was the first one to document what happens over, a series of movements. And this is kind of interesting because this was done because of a bet, whether or not the horse's feet actually all left the ground at the same time. And I feel like, okay, this was a $42,000, and that's a lot of money back in the day, experiment to figure this out, but I kind of feel like we could have seen that. But at any rate, everyone thought that the horse had its legs splayed out. More like this was the time, these two phases, when the horse was off the ground. But in fact, it's when the horse has everything pulled together, if that makes sense. That's when the horse is off the ground. But they weren't sure if he was really completely off the ground or not. So these are 16 frames per second. That's how animation, and that is how early film is, moved, on the images on the celluloid. they do 16 frames per second, and this is where it comes from. Because he had a tripwire for the horse to hit within a second, and he took 16 images in that per second, if that makes sense. So he settled a wager, and he used 12 cameras in this case, but it's, less, and there are other images where he did the 16, but that's why we have 16 frames per second. Originally, now we use 24. Okay, so early silent films, they're just black and white. There wasn't any color photography either, no color moving film, and there's no color photography. Early 20th century. It was not until the 30s and 40s that color film came into play, and with photography, it wasn't really widely the way things always work in the art world, and anything really with inventions, a couple of people or people with a lot of know-how might use it, and then later it has more widespread use. So early films were very short, and they were documenting daily life. We see with Edison, he does something called, one is Fred Ought Sneeze, it's 5 seconds long, but there are other shorter ones, or just 20 minutes or so on like that. So there were a lot of shorts put together. That's when you used to go to the movies and you'd see several things at one time, because none of these were very long. Nickelodeons were small storefront movie theaters. The way movies were shown were changed quite a bit over time, but they had music halls, and they would accompany movies with a piano or an orchestra, and later, but that originally they were just shot in black and white. One of the first ones made in 1902, this is 14 minutes, like I said, these are all short, in France. Georges Méliès, he was a magician, and then he got interested in incorporating this into his magic show to show this 14-minute film. And it's quite sophisticated. It's interesting because 1902, he does this space theme. One of the first movies ever made, is interesting to note, was a rocket going to the moon, was sort of a fantasy sci-fi movie. And they take a rocket and they send this projectile into the moon. It lands into the man in the moon's right eye. Because at that time, some theories were the moon was made of cheese. I don't know how serious that was ever taken. And the other one was that there was a man's face, like a spiritual being or embodiment up there. But it does kind of look like a person's face. The Chinese think it looks like a rabbit, and I don't know if that has anything to do with a different angle of looking at the moon. I think it would be the same as the United States or the Northern Hemisphere. But at any rate, this is our first film, one of our first films. So this is his most famous film. These astronomers launched themselves, right? And then he was one of the first ones to use multiple settings, repeated scenes, and cuts. Now, if you get to see this, you'll see how theatrical it looks. It looks like it's a staged play that's filmed in sequences, and this is very early, and that is, the medium that early film follows to a degree, where they're transitioning from documenting basically a play into really becoming film. All right, so on a darker note, D.W. Griffith, who became very, very wealthy, in part because of this film, Birth of a Nation, it's unfortunately, it had widespread popularity, but it's unfortunately about the Ku Klux Klan. It even kind of says that. You can't read it. It's very small print right here. But the fiery cross of the Ku Klux Klan. But it was a sensation in 1915. Now, it's frustrating because in some ways there's so little to see at this point in time, in 1915, that you're going to consume any movie that gets out there, and it's spectacularly well done, for its time, and you're excited about it. But it does spread that message of hatred and so on. And the Ku Klux Klan later, and maybe at the time, I don't know, but later it really becomes an indoctrination or a validation of their movement
and they use it in some of their early ways to get people to sign up. Early on when they're getting new people to sign up, unfortunately. And it's documented. It's interesting. If you see Black Klansman by Spike Lee, recent film, 2017, I think. Anyway, he shows a segment of that where there's a Klan meeting, and that people are watching this. But it is Hollywood's first blockbuster. It has notoriety in that way, and also because Griffith has a film company with Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks and some other people, and he starts like a film company, and it's important, United Artists, but they kick him out later. All right.